Hey, are you familiar with these images? The best known work of art in the world, as how it has been described, the Mona Lisa, and then one of the most famous artworks, the Last Supper, the magnificent Eiffel Tower, and then the star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet. I think most of you, if not all, know these amazing masterpieces. And do you know what do they have in common? Yeah, they're all works of art, of course, but aside from that, it is the fact that these great and world famous masterpieces are all from Europe. Yes, like wow, how could they be able to make these brilliant pieces? What was their inspiration? What was their foundation? What's the foundation of European artworks, right? Or how did art start in Europe? And that is what we're going to talk about today. The past has something to do with the present. That's right. So let us talk about the past or the history, or the art of emerging Europe. Hello everyone, I am Angelica Kumapas and together with my groupmates, we will be discussing, by the way, we are the third group and yes, we will be discussing, just like of what I've mentioned earlier, the art of emerging Europe. So here are the things that we are expected to learn or to be able to do at the end of the lesson or the discussion. First is to identify the major periods in Western art history or the European art history, and then second is to compare and contrast the artworks produced during the different time periods and art movements, and the last one is to discuss the importance of art to the development of Western culture. They said that art has been a very crucial part in European history, from the ancient to the modern times. Art has been used to communicate ideologies and belief systems. So that's how important art was, during those ancient times. And talking about ancient times, I will discuss the two ancient civilizations of Europe which no doubt were very influential, the Greek and Roman civilizations. So these two civilizations were also known as the classical world. Why? Because they aimed to embody the highest possible standard of quality in all aspects of their societies. So in other words, they were very particular with their standards, like standards for beauty. That is why, expectedly, their artworks were so great because they adhered to the highest possible standards that they set. So diba, there are different art movements which emerged during the different time periods in Europe. And when we say art movement, it is like a specific art style during a specific period of time. So most of those art movements have taken inspiration from the certain artistic elements from these two civilizations. Okay, so let us start with the first one, the ancient Greece. The Greeks were known to excel in different fields and aspects of society. They valued poetry, drama, and philosophy, which remain interesting fields of study for the modern times, right? And talking about their arts, when you want to be involved like in painting, sculpture, or architecture, you have to be qualified. You are required to have a certain skill sets and body of knowledge before making yourself involved in arts. In ancient Greece, they believed that man was at the center of society and how they trained their minds could be the very foundation of how they live their lives. So that's their belief. And they also valued freedom. In fact, the humanist ideals of the Greeks were reflected in their democratic form of government. So there is this freedom in there. Freedom was also reflected in their artworks, architecture, literature, and philosophy. And did you know that the political ideals of Greece civilization became the framework for the democratic form of government in modern times? See how influential the Greece civilization is. The Greeks were also notably passionate about natural phenomenon and believed that nature should be in perfect order. So after knowing their beliefs, principles, and ideologies, just know that these are the inspiration, or these are where they based their artworks. Next is we will be talking about the development of Greek art. Okay, the development of Greek art can be divided into 4 periods. As you can see here, geometric, archaic, classical, and Hellenistic. Okay, so let us start with the first one, the geometric period. This was the time when Greece starting to get back to the onslaught of what seemed to be their dark ages, and a period when geometric shapes and patterns have taken spotlight in most of the artwork. So as you can see here, there is a jar, and you can see geometric shapes and patterns in there, diba? So that is the geometric period. They put emphasis on geometric shapes and patterns on their artworks. And then the second period is the archaic period, the period when they place importance on human figures. So that's like very self-explanatory. As you can see here in a jar, you can see human figures. And then next is the classical period. This was considered the peak of Greek sculpture and architecture. So this was the time when the Greeks found themselves rebuilding their temples and focusing creating artworks. So in classical period, this was the time when they put focus or importance on their sculpture and architecture. And then the last one is the Hellenistic period. This was the time of the brilliant leader Alexander the Great. Okay, so the art during this period was primarily focused on showcasing emotions and depicting reality. So one of the most famous Hellenistic sculptures is Laocoon and his sons. This is an example of work wherein the Greeks emphasize the details of the body, and most subjects of their work included that of the gods from Greek mythology. And one important thing to remember is that the origins of theater and drama can be traced back during this civilization, the Greek civilization. Let us move on to the next civilization, the ancient Rome, said to be one of Western Europe's mightiest empires. So the Roman Republic was established around 500 BCE. And since they had expanded and covered many territories, they interacted with neighboring civilizations, particularly with the Greeks. So we can see here that Greece and Rome were really connected during those times. And remember the Hellenistic period, the 4th period of the development of Greek art. So it can be said that Roman civilization came of age during this period. So the Romans were enthusiastic about the Greeks and their achievements in the arts, and the fusion of Greek and Roman cultures can be seen in most Roman artworks. So some would argue that the Romans merely copied Greek art. So this eventually made the Romans produce artworks that are often looking stern, harsh, and strong. They also invoked the principles of realism in most of their works, highlighting the features of human beings. Aside from this, the Romans were also known to be master builders. So they were skilled or proficient in the art of building. And the Colosseum is one of their architectural achievements. Colosseum was planned and constructed during the reign of Emperor Vespasian. One of the main uses of Colosseum was for entertainment purposes like public events and gladiator games. So as you can notice, ancient Greece had a significant influence on the development of Roman civilization. Like in Roman theater and drama, there are a number of Greek influences. But it's just that the Roman plays are more on Roman games since they are not really enthusiastic about theatrical works, unlike the Greeks.
Good day everyone, I am Michaela de la Cruz and we're going to report about Renaissance art, Mannerism, Baroque, and the Rococo. Renaissance art. During the Renaissance period, artists valued the individual as a subject of arts. The influence of humanism shifted the focus of some artworks during the Renaissance period to empower the individual. Most artworks emphasized naturalism, which was also influence of humanism since there was a great emphasis on the proportionality of the human body. Most artists also added the perspective of depth wherein spaces were explored in different artworks. This technique provided a three-dimensional perspective of most Renaissance paintings. Renaissance artists also gave importance to non-religious themes or subjects, so this was also brought by privilegizations of the art during the Renaissance period. However, most artworks remained religious in its focus and theme. During the Renaissance period, there was also a revival of Roman theatrical plays. These plays were performed during special occasions at the court of Italian princes. The plays were done in such way that they showcased grand and lavish entertainment for the audience. Aside from the song and the dance numbers, they invested in elaborate stages and costume for the actors. Eventually, this would lead to Italy's opera, which have greatly influenced the tradition of the popular theater. Now for Mannerism. Mannerism was a period in art history which was a product of the Renaissance period. During the Renaissance, artists would observe the nature and try their best to emulate it based on their observations. As the Renaissance period ended, artists started directly copying subjects from existing works of art. Most artworks during this period displayed distorted figures, two-dimensional spaces, discordant hues and colors, and the lack of defined focal point. Baroque and the Rococo. The term Baroque is derived from the Portuguese term barroco, which is translated as irregularly shaped pearl. This is suitable description that Rome was the birthplace of Baroque period, which according to some historians was a response to Protestantism. This period roughly spanned from 1600 to 1750. Although it was a period following the Renaissance, it can be said that a lot of artists have developed styles and techniques different from their Renaissance predecessors. Most artists used colorful palettes and ornamentation in their works. This was a time when Italy, in particular, strengthened not only their religion but also other aspects like politics and art. Expansion was the central theme of this period, which became very much evident in the artwork produced during this time. Motion and spaces were taken into consideration by artists like the use of the dramatic lighting and the concept of time. So aside from art, music was also flourished during the Baroque period. This is because people believed that music could serve as a powerful tool communication messages that can evoke certain feelings among its listeners. Baroque music was able to clearly distinguish loud from soft and solo from ensemble. Since the birthplace of this period was in Rome, it did not come as a surprise that most composers come from Italy. These include Vivaldi, Corelli, and Monteverdi. Eventually, the influence of Baroque music spread outside Italy and reached other parts of Europe. Other well-known Baroque composers include Germany's Bach and Handel. Since Baroque composers through their works tried to evoke certain emotions from their audience, they began to make more complex musical compositions and performance. However, it can be noticed that initially, this kind of music was limited only to powerful institutions like the church and the individuals like the patrons. Eventually, such performances would be made accessible to the media and the masses.
Neoclassicism and Romanticism art reported by Quizal Oliveira.
Neoclassicism was inspired by the discovery of ancient and Greek and Roman archaeological sites and artifacts that became known throughout Europe in popular illustrated reports of various travel expeditions. Scholars such as James Stewart and Nicholas Rivet made a systematic effort to catalog and record the past in works like the Antiquities of Athens in 1762. Neoclassicism was a movement in Europe that transpired during the late 18th and 19th century. Neoclassicism adopted the hierarchy of painting that was established by the French Royal Academy of the Arts in 1669. History painting, which included subjects from the Bible, classical mythology, and history, was ranked as a top category, followed by portraiture, genre painting, landscapes, and still lifes. This hierarchy was used to evaluate works submitted for the Salon or for prizes like the illustrious Prix de Rome, and influenced the financial value of works for patrons and collectors. The work of Nicolas Poussin and Claude Lorraine were revered as the ideal exemplars of history painting, and both artists were primarily influenced upon Neoclassicism. Claude, which is influenced by the Neoclassicism, painted landscape using naturalistic detail and observation of light in its effect, with the figures from mythological or biblical scene, as seen in his A Landscape with Apollo guarding the herds of Admetus and Mercury, stealing them in 1645. An effect of orderly harmony was conveyed in many of his work, which appealed to Neoclassicism belief that art should express the ideal virtue. Romanticism as an art movement used the central theme of Neoclassicist artwork as a springboard. Romanticists have highlighted heroic elements into their work. During the Age of Revolution, there has been a tremendous focus on patriotic and nationalistic movement. One of the major revolutions in history would be the French Revolution. The major and the central theme of Romanticism movement include the emphasis on the goodness of mankind. Most work also promoted justice, equality, and social order. Artists also emphasized emotion and feelings of a man, which was a deviation from the humanist principle of rationalism. The following are the examples of Romanticism art.
Liberty Leading the People painting by Eugene Delacroix, and The Wrath of the Medusa painting by Theodore Géricault.
Realism, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, reported by Joanit Casala.
Realism. Realism in the arts, the accurate, detailed, simple deception of human or of contemporary arts. Realism rejects imaginative idealization in favor of a close observation of outward appearance. Such as realism, in its broad sense, has comprised many artistic currents in a different civilization. In the visual arts, realism was heavily influenced by Hellenistic Greece culture, since most of the artworks during that period placed emphasis on the human body. In its specific sense, realism refers to a mid-19th century artistic movement characterized by subject paint from everyday life in naturalistic manner. However, the term is also generally used to describe artworks painted in the realistic, almost photographic way. So one of the examples of realism is the street photography that capture life in a city without any artificial elements or post-processing. Impressionism. The Impressionism movement started in France, which led to a break from tradition in European painting. Impressionism style of a painting developed in the last third of the 19th century, characterized chiefly by a short brushstroke of the bright colors in immediate juxtaposition to represent the effect of light on objects. The distinctive characteristic of this style is that allow the impressionist or the artist to emphasize the immediate he has of a particular event or scene. Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is a term used to describe the reaction in 1880s against Impressionism. This was led by Paul Siagas, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh, and George Seurat. Despite the various distinctive styles that gave emphasis to defining from the use of broken colors in short brushstroke, emerging as a reaction against the Impressionists concerned from the naturalistic deception of light and color. Post-Impressionists fought to bring back the focus on the subject, mattered the structure in the painting that they felt was lost. Their early tendency towards abstraction paved the way of the radical modernist quest for abstraction in the early 20th century.
A pleasant day to each and everyone. I am Daryl Dabal and now I am going to continue or report, and the topic that I will discuss is the Neo-Impressionism, Art Nouveau, and Fauvism. So first, let's talk about the Neo-Impressionism. So Neo-Impressionism as an art movement. Neo-Impressionism is considered as a response to empirical realism of Impressionism. Most painters who subscribe to such a movement rely on a systematic and scientific techniques that have a predetermined visual effects, not only on the artwork itself, but also on how the audience perceive the art. The leading figure in Neo-Impressionism was George Seurat, who recorded optical sensation on a more scientific manner. His color theories paved the way for the technique called pointillism. This art technique basically utilized discrete dots and dashes of pure color. These elements are believed to blend with the viewer's perspective, and these are the examples. Also, aside from Seurat, Neo-Impressionist artists include Henry Edmond Cross, Maximilian Duce, and Camille Pissarro, and this is their artwork. The next one is Art Nouveau. Between 1890 and 1910, countries from Europe and United States witnessed the emergence and flourishing of a new art style. This ornamental style of art was break from the conservative historicism, which was the prevailing and dominant theme of most Western artwork. This ornamental style uses long and organic lines that are concretely manifested in architecture, jewelry, and glass designs, and these are the example of this style. In most work, the defining characteristic of Art Nouveau is the asymmetrical line that usually is the form of insect wings or flower stalks. The line is done in such a graceful and elegant manner that somehow evokes a certain power to it. And the last one is a Fauvism. This is the style of painting that emerged in France around the 20th century. So what makes the Fauvists revolutionary is that they use pure and vibrant colors by applying straight from the paint tubes directly to the canvas. This is done to produce a sense of explosion of colors in the canvas. The Fauves, just like the Impressionists, painted directly from nature. The difference lies with how the Fauves have this strong and expressive reaction to how they portray their subject, Most Fauvism works reject the conservative and traditional rendering of three-dimensional space, and what artists add was they introduced and promoted a picture space that is defined by the movement colors. So these are the example of the Fauvism. And these are the famous artists of Fauvism.
Good day everyone, I am Regina Enriquez and I am going to discuss Cubism and Futurism. Cubism, a highly influential visual art style that was created principally by the artists Pablo Picasso and George Braque in Paris between 1907 and 1914. The Cubist style emphasized the flat, two-dimensional surface of the picture plane, rejecting the traditional techniques perspective, foreshortening, modeling, and refuting time-honored theories that art should imitate nature. Cubist painters were not bound to copying form, texture, color, and space. Instead, they presented a new reality in paintings that depicted radically fragmented objects. Cubism derived its name from remarks that were made by the critic Louis Vaucel, who derisively describes Braque's 1908 work, Houses at L'Estaque, as being composed of cubes. In Braque's painting, the volumes of the houses, the cylindrical forms of the trees, and the tan and green color scheme are reminiscent of Paul Cézanne's landscapes, which deeply inspired the Cubists in their first stage of development. It was, however, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, painted by Picasso in 1907, that presaged the new style. In this work, the forms of 5 female nudes become fractured, angular shapes. As in Cézanne's art, perspective is rendered through color, with the warm reddish-brown advancing and the cool blues receding. The phrase was intended as derision, but by 1911, Cubism became the common term for what the public was embracing as an exciting abstract style. The style evolved out of an atmosphere of intense experimentation. Artists such as Pablo Picasso and George Braque were searching for abstract ways to portray life in its full complexity. The Cubist style allowed them to show their subjects simultaneously from multiple perspectives. They could assemble an image together from parts seen from different vantage points, or show a moving object as it shifted over time from a single perspective. While Picasso and Braque are credited with creating this new visual language, it was adopted and further developed by many painters, including Fernand Léger, Robert and Sonia Delaunay, Juan Gris, Albert Glaze, and John Metzinger. Though primarily associated with painting, Cubism also exerted a profound influence on 20th century sculpture and architecture. Futurism, an early 20th century artistic movement centered in Italy that emphasized the dynamism, speed, energy, and the power of the machine and the vitality, change, and restlessness of modern life. During the second decade of the 20th century, the movement's influence radiated outward across most of Europe, but most significantly to the Russian avant-garde. The most significant results of the movement were in the visual arts and poetry. Futurism was first announced on February 20, 1909, when the Paris newspaper Le Figaro published a manifesto by the Italian poet and editor Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. Marinetti coined the word futurism to reflect his goal of discarding the art of the past and celebrating change, originality, and innovation in culture and society. Marinetti's manifesto inspired a group of young painters in Milan to apply futurist ideas to the visual arts. Umberto Boccioni, Carlo Cara, Luigi Rossello, Giacomo Balla, and Gino Severini published several manifesto on painting in 1910. Like Marinetti, They glorified originality and expressed their disdain for inherited artistic traditions.